My name is Judy Showalter, and today is November 12th, 2008. I'm here today with Jack Russell as part of the Living Legacies Oral History Project for Randolph-Macon College. Also with us today are Sarah Hendrick and Lori Preston. Mr. Russell is a practicing attorney. He is a member of the class of 1944 and has served the college in a variety of roles since his graduation. Thank you for participating with us today. We appreciate your time very much. How did you first hear about Randolph-Macon College?
Well, that's a good question, Judy. I don't recall, actually. That goes way back, you know. I came here in the fall of 1940, and which is 68 years ago. And I can't tell you how I knew about it. I thought about it when I saw the list of questions that they were giving me. I started going back through my mind to see, well, now how did I know about it? And as I sat upstairs, when the time came for me to go to college, and back in those days, you didn't make the applications as far ahead as they do now. I didn't do anything about it until my senior year in high school. And I had three places that I could have gone. Emory and Henry, which is where my father had gone and where he taught for 4 years, where I spent the first 4 years of my life. So I contend I'm an alumnus of Emory and Henry too. And to the University of Richmond, which is where he taught when he came to Richmond. He taught there for 9 years. And then, of course, I knew that Randolph-Macon was up here. I don't recall ever having been here. And I might have, I don't know. But I knew Ashland was north of Richmond. But, you know, travel in those days wasn't as easy as it is now. And the first recollection that I have of being up here was when my father and I came up here to see about registering. Yeah, see if I could get in and register. And at that time, we met with Dr. Moreland.
Just getting feedback from my microphone.
We met with Dr. Moreland, and he was very interested, and said that I could get in. They could take me in September. And interestingly enough, my father, or he or I, one or the other, asked if there was any chance of getting a scholarship. And he said yes. And gave me what he called a half scholarship, $150, $75 a semester, which was half of the tuition in those days. And so I decided to come, and there wasn't a single day that I can think of that I was disappointed in my decision from the very first. It wasn't long after I got here, after I registered and was in residence, that I met a young man named Jake Price. He was a senior and a Phi Delta Theta member, and I met him, and we got acquainted and somewhat attached. If there was a mentor, he was it. And he got me into Phi Delta Theta. There were only about 300 students on the campus, and even though the campus was much smaller, it still, you know, they were pretty well scattered out. You never saw a great big group at one time. There were 2 dormitories, Thomas Branch and Mary Branch. I lived in the 3rd floor of Thomas Branch on the Henry Street side, which is the east side, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I had a corner room on the outside corner. So I had 3 windows, one on one side and 2 on the other. And lived on the 3rd floor that it was. And the first year I was here, there was a student across the hall from me, and at our end of the hall came down and made a V, so that the doors of the two rooms were sort of diagonal.
Okay.
Instead of facing each other, they were sort of diagonal, and they came to a point. Well, this guy was from, I don't have any idea what his name was, but he was from up around New York someplace, and he apparently had loved to play lacrosse. And that was his main goal in life, I think, at that time. He had his lacrosse stick with him, and he'd get out there in the hall and play with that thing and fiddle around, and he did that instead of studying. So he didn't last very long. And I think he finished up, he got through, he went here 1 year. And then the second year, Lambeth Clark, who had lived on the first floor, moved up to the third floor to that single room. And so we were across the hall of mates for a whole year. But that's the story so far.
Now, you said it was fortunate to be on the third floor. There has to be a story there. Why is it fortunate to be on the third floor?
You're fortunate if you live on the third floor because they can't throw water on you. And in those days, and I don't know whether it's still true or not, but back in those days, in the spring of the year, it was dangerous, particularly around dusk, to walk by any wing of Thomas Branch, particularly the east and west wings. The center wing didn't have a walkway going down in front of it. It had one leading up to it, but not going down by it. But in the east wing, they had the parking lot. In the center of the building, which is now closed in, was a parking lot. And other things too, but I mean, basically that's what it was. And the rooms on that side, on the inside of the building, had opened out of that parking lot. And then the rooms on the end of the hall, the open end, the rooms were all the way across. They were called bowling alleys. And they put 3 students, usually put 3 students in each one. And they had windows on 3 sides, and particularly along the walkway that went along behind the building.
Okay.
And at that time, the administration was in Wash Frank Hall. And what is now Peel Hall was then the Walter Hines Page Library. And down in the stacks, some of the professors had their offices. I know that Early Fox, who was a history professor and was my faculty advisor, had his office down there. And I don't know who else it might have been. I know he had his down there.
Okay. In the library.
In the library, in the stacks.
Okay.
And so there was no administration over on that side of this walkway. The walk connected, and maybe it still does, Wash Frank Hall and Henry Street. The driveway, you could come across there and walk on paved ground all the way across. Dr. Simpson, who was the dean, T. McNider Simpson, Jr., lived in a white house down in, if it wasn't on the corner, it was near the corner of College Avenue and the next street down. Not Henry, it was the next one. So he would walk across there and then walk over to the street and go on down to his house. And one incident in particular, it was dusk, and I doubt very seriously if the boy could tell who it was. And, this figure comes along and he drops the bag. And I think it hit him on the shoulder. I'm not sure, but nevertheless, he didn't do anything. He just went on. But once that young man found out who it was, he dropped that rag on. He was petrified. But water battles were common. I remember one time in particular when I was coming back from the fraternity house at night, and you got it so that when you got ready to, and you could enter the building from the inside, from the court, and that's the way we went and came most of the time. And when you went in that door, you always opened the door and stopped to make sure that, and looked up to make sure that you weren't in danger. Now you had a little bit of protection because the stairs stuck out above you, so you could get some clearance. But if you once you cleared that space, you were fair game. And I came in that door one night, and the water was just literally rolling down the steps like a waterfall. And they had a huge water battle while I was gone. And that's the reason that I said that I was fortunate to be on the third floor.
You were a little above most of that.
Well, you were. As long as you were up there, you were safe. Because those guys down below couldn't drop water on you. All they could do is remember, and the next time you come in, try to get you. But that was it.
We've also heard stories about the roof of Thomas Branch. Did you spend much time out on the roof?
Interestingly enough, I never went on the roof.
Huh.
And at that time, back in those days, I didn't know anybody who did.
We'll have to see when that started. We have pictures of students on the roof of Thomas
Well, it
Branch.
doesn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me a bit. Interestingly enough, at that time, the wings were not connected. Well, they were connected physically, but you couldn't walk from one to the other. If you wanted to go from the third floor of Thomas Branch to the third floor of the center wing, center section, you had to go down all the way and then back up again.
Were they connected through the basement, like Mary Branch, or did you have to exit the wing?
Basement.
It doesn't have a basement. Okay.
I don't think it did. I never was down there.
I don't know. I know Mary Branch. I don't know Thomas
Mary
Branch.
Branch uses theirs. This is an occupied space. Thomas Branch is a different design, and it was literally 3 different sections, totally independent of the other.
You mentioned Phi Delta Theta. So can you tell us about some of your activities, the Greek activities and other activities on campus?
There I go. There weren't as many activities then as there are now. There were some social occasions. The fraternities were primarily a means of social life. We would have parties every now and then. The main thing was that the Pan-Atlantic Association put on 1 or 2 big dances every year. And in the spring, there was the Pan-Atlantic Ball. And other than that, I don't recall that they took on any projects and things like that. And I don't know to what extent manpower played a part in it, but after my freshman year, we started losing students to the war. And so the student body gradually dwindled. The one project that I know we did, and it wasn't just the Fidels, it was a big field. It may have been the athletic field, day field, I'm not sure. But it was a big field out from far enough that the lights from the buildings didn't interfere. And they had a plane watching station. Yes. it turned out that we never did need it, but it was manned in the nighttime, and they had a telephone out there that you could call in to someplace. We did it 2 people at a time, and it wasn't necessarily 2 finalists at a time. At one time, I was out there with one of the professors. It was whoever volunteered, and most of us volunteered to do it at some time or other.
We've taken a look at your yearbooks, and we see that you were on the yearbook staff. What?
You've gotten ahead of me. I was ultimately business manager of the annual yearbook. I was on the staff the whole 3 years I was here. And I can't remember who the others were. And I have my copy at home someplace. Haven't dug it out yet.
Can I ask a question? When you said that the student body dwindled in World War II, did that happen precipitously? Like after
No.
Pearl Harbor, was there a big drop? Or?
Oh, it didn't start until after Pearl Harbor.
Right, but was there a big exodus at
No.
that point, or was it just
No.
a sort of dwindling?
Those who graduated, of course, left. But they weren't replaced. Well, they were replaced, too, because the class behind them contained Luther White. And there was a new class each year. And now that I think about it, Jennings Cully and a man named Curtis Saunders from Suffolk were freshmen my junior year. Luther White had been a freshman my sophomore year. But the draft went into effect, and then some of the young men, maybe some of those who weren't doing particularly well, just decided to go ahead and volunteer. And I told you about Jake Price. He graduated at the end of my freshman year and went into the Air Corps. Then it was the Air Corps, not the Air Force, and became a pilot and was ultimately shot down and killed before I graduated, before I left here. His name is on one of those 3 or 4 pilasters or whatever they call them out there behind the old chapel.
You mentioned before that you were a history major.
No.
No?
Math major.
Math major. I thought I heard history. Okay. And how did you decide what to major in?
When I came here, I liked math all the way through high school. Did well on it, and for some reason or other, I never was interested in history. At that particular time, I wasn't interested in any course that required a lot of reading. I wasn't a good reader in the first place, but for some reason at that time they just didn't interest me, and I took those that I had to take. But the rest of them I took all with math, chemistry, and physics.
Who were some of your major professors?
Well, at that time, Judy, there weren't much but major professors here. The faculty was relatively small. Dr. T. McNider Simpson, who was the dean, was also the senior math professor. I had him all 3 years. They gave us placement tests when we came in. And based on what you did in that placement test, they decided whether you went in the upper. He's the one who taught it. The then registrar, Marshall McNeil, I think it was, also taught math, and he also, I think, taught physics. I'm not sure. But I know he taught math. And then I had Dr. Stanford Webb for English. I never did have Grillette Simpson. Though they were the two English teachers at the time. And I fell in the upper section, and Dr. Webb taught that. And Grillette Simpson taught the others. The main difference was that for some reason, and I don't know how I happened to fall that way, the classes Dr. Simpson taught had to write a paper every week. And in the class section I was in, we only wrote one paper. That was a research paper. It was a major paper. And I wasn't particularly a good writer. I would have had a hard time dreaming up things to write about if I had to write a paper every week. But I knew Grillette Simpson because he was the faculty advisor for the Fidels. And in fact, we got to be pretty good friends. I was treasurer my second year, so I had to see him frequently. And then, of course, there was Professor Terry, and he was called Squat. You never saw him. He was very short and sort of chubby. And he was nice, very good, very nice guy. He taught Bible and philosophy, and I took Bible under him. And there was Early Smith, I'm sorry, who taught education. And that was the course that all of the athletes took. You never failed to get a good grade in his class. There was a Dr. Haley who taught German and Greek, and I guess that was all he taught. J. Paul McConnell, I didn't take any classes under Haley. Paul McConnell I did, and he was from Southwest Virginia, incidentally. And he was a character. Rode a bicycle all the time to school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where he lived out here. I heard, and I never did get involved, that he had students come and clean his yard and things like that. But he was a real character. He was a good teacher, but he was a character. Who else? Early Lee Fox, taught history, and I took one course, I think, under him, and he was my faculty advisor. And either at the end of during my sophomore year, or the early part of my junior year, he was killed in an automobile accident. Other names may come to me, but there weren't many more. It was a very small faculty. And that leads me to one other thing. One of the things I prize most about Randolph-Macon is that I have a diploma signed by every member of the faculty. And, I can look at that and remember all those people, the names and courses they taught. Bullington. Mm-hmm. I didn't take biology, but Dr. Bullington was the biology professor. And he lived in one of the houses at the dining hall. There was a row of about 3 or 4 big 2-story white frame houses the college owned, and they had faculty members living in each one of them. And he lived in one of them. And every day he would come out of that biology building, which was no longer in existence, it was north of Pace.
Pettyjohn?
Not Pettyjohn. It was no, it wasn't Pace. It was the building where the well, it wasn't but one science building, because biology had the first floor of that other building.
Which was, the other building was Pettyjohn
Pettyjohn.
Hall, wasn't
Okay.
it? With the observatory on the top?
Right, okay. The first floor was biology. The second floor was physics and math. And Dr. Keeble taught physics. And he had the whole north end of the building on the second floor. I took physics under him, too. And then Dr. Updike was the head of the chemistry department, and Schuyler Miller had just come here and was teaching chemistry. And I took 3 years of chemistry. The first year, and then I took analytical, and then took organic. Dr. Updike taught organic chemistry at 8 o'clock. And the classroom was on the west side of the building. And you know, that building is not very far from the railroad tracks. And at that time, because that was my third year, the war was going full tilt in 43, spring of 43, in the fall of 42. And I don't know who counted them, but I'm sure it was correct that they were counted, and there was at least 100 trains a day going through here. So it was a problem. And Dr. Updike didn't have the strongest voice. And so if a train was passing, he had to stop. And, but it was an interesting time. Oh, the other professor was Dr. Little guy taught Latin. I have a hard time with name. Remember, it'll come to me in a minute. Loved to play tennis. He was a little short man, bachelor, lived here in town. His demise was a result of riding his bicycle into the side of a train.
Dr. Bowen.
Bowen, that's right. Thank you. I never did take Latin under him, but there wasn't a soul on this campus that didn't know who Dr. Bowen was. And the students who took courses under him could imitate him. And as I said, he loved to play tennis. And he would, after the class was over, maybe the last class of the day, he would stop one of the students and say, "You think you can get a tennis game together?" And they'd go down and play tennis. And everything was different then. We had classes 3 days a week, including Saturday. So you had classes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
Okay.
And all the classes were over by noon, every day. If you had labs, you had them in the afternoon. So chemistry lab was in the afternoon, physics lab was in the afternoon. And so any student who was taking a laboratory course had afternoon work to do. But if you didn't happen to have one that day, you were free to do what you wanted to. And in the spring, particularly, well, in the wintertime, it was basketball, interfraternity basketball. And in the summertime, springtime, it was baseball. And, you'd play games nearly every day because you were out there, and you could. So there was plenty of things to do, but it was Oh, it's a very interesting time.
Well, and you managed the baseball team?
Uh,
You're in the baseball team picture, but you don't have any statistics, so we're guessing you
I
managed.
was the manager.
Okay.
Uh, I was the assistant in 3 years, and I was the assistant manager of the baseball team for 2 years and manager the third year. The one ahead of me was Copley McLean, who is now a retired physician at the University of Virginia. But I enjoyed it. A fraternity brother of mine, Aubrey Harlow, was assistant manager along with me on both sports. He became manager of the basketball team his junior year, and I was manager of the baseball team. But I still helped him. Primarily, and, you know, they didn't have all the people they have now. So I was usually the timekeeper in the basketball games, and had the blank pistol that you shot off to stop the game at the end. In the old gym.
And were athletics a big activity? Did students come out and watch?
They came to the football games, and they'd come to the basketball games. There were never a whole lot watching baseball, and there still aren't. I was out there one day and saw mostly players. Mm-hmm. Every now and then you'd find a few of them watching practice, football practice. I don't remember ever having anybody in there just watching basketball practice. But there was a good interest in sports, particularly in the ones that we fielded teams in. And there weren't as many teams in as there are now. Mm-hmm.
And after your junior year, what did you do?
Well, at that time, once you became 18, you had to register for the draft. That was my sophomore year. And obviously I didn't want to get drafted. The Army was the last place I wanted to be. I was in the Navy. And so I found out about a program the Navy had called V7. And college students who were in good standing could volunteer and be assigned to that program with the then assurance that you could graduate. It was expected that you would graduate and then you'd go on active duty. Well, that was fine for about half a year, or maybe a year. And then the Navy, in its wisdom, decided that they needed those boys and men, and so they changed the program from V7 to what they call V12. And in V12, depending on how many semesters you had, they gave you additional semesters. And they established V12 schools, that regional schools, sort of. The one here was the University of Richmond. We had students there from William & Mary, VPI, VMI, Hampton-Sydney, of course up here, and some from the University of Richmond. And I know that they announced that if you could graduate in one semester, at the end of your junior year, if you could graduate in one more semester, they'd let you stay in school. The foolish part about the whole thing was they let you stay the whole year. if you couldn't graduate in one semester but could graduate in 2 semesters, you couldn't stay. You had to go active duty. And so it didn't. Lots of stuff the Navy didn't make any sense, but nevertheless, that's what the rule was. Left here and went down to the University of Richmond, July the 1st, 1943, and we were apprentice seamen in the real class of the word, sense of the word. There was nobody below us. But it was interesting. We had a good time. We had a whole semester of college work. They had the regular faculty teaching, and it wasn't a bit different than it would have been if I'd have been a student at the University of Richmond. I took 15 hours, and some courses that I couldn't have gotten up here. One was statistics, I remember. And Dr. Simpson, in his wisdom and kindness, gave me credit for every hour. Let me transfer every hour. Mm-hmm. But I went there one semester, and then in October, all of those who were in my group were transferred down to the Portsmouth Navy Yard to wait. The Navy had midshipman schools around, and we were going to a midshipman school. And the one we were lined up to go to was Notre Dame. But it wasn't ready for us, so they had to find a place to house us. And they had some barracks down at the Navy Yard in Portsmouth. That's where we went. And I don't recall what we did other than just lie around. They may have had some activity just to occupy our time, but it was boring as it could be. And then, on maybe just a day's notice at the most, we were told to pack our stuff up. We were leaving, and they'd pulled a train into the Navy Yard and loaded us on it, and headed us toward South Bend. And that was the roughest ride I ever had. It was the old-fashioned coaches with the low backs. We got on the trains late in the afternoon, so we rode that train all night long. It was something. But anyway, I went to Notre Dame for the midshipman school. And, you know, the Army had 90-day wonders. The Navy had 60-day. I got my commission in 60 days.
Wow.
And the interesting thing was that all they taught us was protocol, basic things that you would need in the Navy. No specialty like gunnery or anything like that at all. So that everyone up there had to go to another school before they could be useful. And because of my vision, I was put in the supply corps. And after I got my commission in January of '44, I was to go to the supply school, which was at the Harvard Business School in Cambridge. And they couldn't take me either. So it was 8 months before I could go to the supply school. So they sent me to the Philadelphia Navy Yard in the supply department. And I came in there as a green ensign and had to learn everything I did. But it was interesting. I enjoyed it. And Philadelphia was a nice place, even though the war was on. And then when I finished there in August, I entered supply school. And that was an interesting experience. Boston was a great place. I enjoyed it, and because we were all officers, and they had less restrictions on us. We had more freedom at that. And after I finished there, I was scheduled for what was then called the Advanced Base Supply Training Command at Camp Perry, just outside of Williamsburg. And I went there and stayed there about 4 or 5 months, I guess, at least. It was living in Quonset huts and things like that. There were several different organizations of that similar type. I mean, various parts of the Navy were all assembled there and on the grounds of Camp Perry, which was a great big place, as well as a German prisoner of war camp. And of course, you could come and go much easier then, and you can't get in there now. It's a CIA. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have been there as long as I was, but I was engaged, and I don't know how the executive officer found out, because I don't remember telling him, but nevertheless, he found out that if I could stay there 2 or 3 or 4 months, I'd get married. So he called me in one day and said they had an office called Permanent Officer of the Day on Navy bases and ships. There was an Officer of the Day. They usually rotated, but in the daytime, they had down in Perry, they had a Permanent Officer of the Day, some ensign that they would assign that to. And you had a Quonset hut and 2 or 3 quartermasters, or yeomen, I mean, and you handled the routine stuff that came in. Like if the the shore patrol had picked up some seaman who was over leave or had decided not to come back, and they picked him up. They brought him into my office first, and we got him squared away, and then sent him back to wherever he was supposed to go. The main duty we had was to be there at sunrise every morning and see that the flag was raised properly, and be there at sunset and see that it was lowered. So anyway, I did that. I didn't live on the base. I found an apartment in town, and Williamsburg was entirely different then than it is now. And the Navy had a bus, and I forget where it stopped, somewhere down in what is now Market Square. And anybody who wanted to go to Camp Perry could go down there and get the bus and ride out to the base. But after I left there, I stayed there until, I guess it was June, and then was assigned to overseas. Went to San Bruno, California, which is just south of San Francisco. The Navy had a big base there. And we were to go there and get our last stuff and training and stuff to go overseas. And because I was going to be there for about 3 or 4 months, I took my wife with me. She found us a place to live in the home of one of the executives of Safeway. up in the hills of Oakland. I mean, that's the upper crust section of Oakland. And I had to commute down to San Bruno every. We were told we were going to be sent to Okinawa and to the big supply base they were building up there, which was being built up in anticipation of invading Japan. And we got sent to Treasure Island, if you're familiar with San Francisco at all. Treasure Island is out there in the bay, and that was the departure point. Everybody that was leaving the United States in the Navy went to Treasure Island, and that's where they left from. And we went down to Treasure Island, and we were there, I guess, less than 4 minutes. But this time, though, the bomb had been dropped, and the Japanese had surrendered. Just had. But that didn't deter the Navy. I mean, we were going to Okinawa. And we were out there about 48 hours, and we're told to get our stuff together. And we were going back in town to a hotel. And it turned out that, I forget what the reason was. Either we didn't have a ship or some technical reason, but they didn't want to keep us on Treasure Island all that time, so they moved the officers back in town. And we stayed out in there for a week or two. Finally got on a ship, merchant ship, and headed east. And got to Hawaii. And because there wasn't any war going on at the time, we tied up at a dock down there and stayed there for a week. And then we got back on board and went to Okinawa, which was an experience in itself.
You ready?
So after the war, you returned to Randolph-Macon, or you graduate. Your diploma is granted in 1947, correct?
June of 47.
How did that come about?
Well, because Dr. Simpson, in his kindness, had agreed to take all the credits from the University of Richmond, I needed only 5 hours and a year of second year Spanish. At that time, you were required to have 2 years of 2 languages, I think it was. And I found out, I worked for a short while after I got back. And then in January of 47, I found out that I could get second year Spanish, first and second semesters, on successive days, on successive hours, on the same day at the University of Richmond. And so I came up here and saw Dr. Simpson and told him I could do that. And I said, that'll finish my requirements. And we talked about it, and he said, all right, I'll give you the credit. We'll let you transfer. So I'm the only one that I know of. There may be somebody else, but I'm the only one I know of who got his degree up here and never attended a class his senior year. But I took the first and second semester of second year Spanish, made very good grades on them, and transferred the credits, and came up here in June of 47 and graduated with that group of people. I keep 44. I knew 1 or 2 of the people in the class, but I had no connection with them as a class. And so I decided that the best thing to do is keep 44. And that's what I've done. Little things happen. Anything else on that you wanted?
I think Lori had a question about Randolph-Macon.
I had a couple of questions. questions. One of those is that although you did your military training at the University of Richmond, there was military training done during the war here at Randolph-Macon. Had that begun before you left?
No.
Air Corps.
Air Corps? I heard some wild tales about it afterward.
We'd love to hear them.
I know, Dale.
No, that's one of the means, probably the means by which Dr. Moreland kept his school open. Looking back on it, he did a fantastic job. He was here at about the most difficult time you could imagine. He took over the school and it was nearly bankrupt. And he pulled it through. By a sheer dint of personality. And I don't know if I told you or not that did I tell you about, he called the group I was in his hand-picked freshman class.
No.
Oh, I was in his first freshman class. He came here in the fall of spring of 39. So the students that came in the fall of 40. No, he came here in the spring of 40. And the students that came in that fall were his first freshman class. And he referred to us frequently throughout the whole year as his hand-picked freshman class, some of which busted out. But anyway, that was the beginning. And we had chapel 3 days a week, required chapel 3 days a week. And in those in places like that, he would frequently refer to us. If somebody in the class had done something, he'd say, well, he's a member of my hand-picked freshman class.
My other question has to do sort of with basic living arrangements. Our students now find it fascinating that the dining hall on campus wasn't built till the 50s. Where did you have your meals and how was that decided?
Oh, in boarding houses. There were 3 boarding houses, 2 of them on College Avenue and 1 on the corner of College and Henry. One of them was run by Mrs. Luck, which was reputed to be the best. Then there was a Miss Wagner, who was down the street from her. And then on the corner of College Avenue and Henry Street, there was a white house, white frame house. That's where the church is. And Mary Lee Blackwell ran that. And as I recall it, Mrs. Luck she quit running a boarding house at the end of my freshman year, I think. Because I have a recollection of taking meals with Mrs. Wagner for a while. And then she quit. The student body was dwindling, but this time it was getting down pretty low. And she quit, and everyone had to go to Mary Lee Blackwell's. And she was quite an institution. But that's how we had meals. But we ate at those places, and then there was down in town, the pool hall that served meals. And a lot of the students ate down there. I was thinking about this the other day when I was reading those questions. It's my recollection that I paid $40 a month for 3 meals a day at Mrs. Luck's. But then again, at that time, gasoline was about 18 or 19 cents a gallon. So,
Now, our students complain a lot about the food now. Was the food pretty good, or did you all complain?
Miss Luck had pretty good food. I didn't know about the others, but until I went there. Mary Lee Blackwell's food was all right. It wasn't as good as Miss Luck's. Miss Luck didn't run a big boarding house. She had a lot, couldn't take but it's a certain number, and I was fortunate to get in. And she put on pretty good meals. the house was situated right where was the home of the college physician, Dr. Ray. And the infirmary was a white frame house over where, well, it was just beyond the KA house. Between the KA and the next building down. It was sitting on a little street over there. And I never had to go over there. But my wife tells me that she went to Roanoke and was on the debate team and came up here on a debate trip once or twice and remembers debating in Wash Frank Hall. And she came here one time and got the flu and ended up over in the infirmary and spent the night over there. So she likes to tell her friends that she spent the night in Randolph-Macon back when it was totally a men's school.
Yeah, we've also heard that a number of students would send their laundry home on the train, on the mail trains. Was that still being done?
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I remember that.
Okay.
Yeah. They would go down to the train station and they had bags for it and boxes or whatever it was and loaded it up and put it on the train.
They had special bags for your laundry?
Well, it was either a bag or a box. You had to put it in something.
Okay. Huh.
And I don't recall, I didn't do it. So I came home nearly every weekend,
Okay.
unless there was something special going on up here. And so I'd take my laundry home. And of course, you had to furnish your own sheets. One thing that we had, I don't know whether they do now or not, that we had maid service. Well, it wasn't maids, it was men. But they came around and they would sweep your room, stir up the dust, and make a pass at dusting, and then make up your bed.
No, they don't do that anymore.
Was that daily?
Yeah, every day, every day. Oh, if you wanted to isolate an incident, and this is where I'm reluctant about to ruin names.
You can keep it anonymous if you'd like. We'd love
but
to know
there
who
was
it was.
On the third floor of the dormitory, right in the middle, right at the head of the steps, and it was about the middle room on the hall, single room. On our floor, there was a pre-ministerial student, and we will leave the name out, but he had a church he was serving out in the country on Sundays only. And he was a okay guy, but he wasn't part of the group. You know, on a hall like that, you got to be friends with everybody in the hall, and you walking up and down the hall. And they didn't stop and go in his room very often, and they knew him, and we all spoke. But he was the brunt of more jokes, more practical jokes than you can imagine. And the worst one was, and I came in Sunday night going from Richmond, and it had already been done. And they told me about it before he got back. He was at church. They had taken, and we only had one bathroom on the floor, and it had showers, the whole thing, all in one room, and big tile floor in there. They had taken every piece of furniture in his room and set it up in the bathroom. Some of it in the shower stall, you know, and around. Every piece. Then they had ingeniously pulled the pins on the door and locked the door back, because it would stay in place if you had it locked. Now, you could do that because even though every room had a door had a lock on it, the key, I could take my key and open it darn near. And so, you know, when you left school for a weekend, you didn't know what you were going to find when you got back, always. But anyway, he came back from church and put his key in the lock and turned the lock, and the door just fell over in the room. And it was a big hollow sound, but there wasn't anything in there. And some of us helped him put it back. but it was things like that going on with him all the time. So life was not dull on the third floor.
I think life is rarely dull in college dormitories. As much as they'd like us to think, it is dull in college dormitories. We very much appreciate your time today, and we'd like to schedule a time to come back and talk
Sure.
about after college life.
Okay. I've enjoyed it. Really. It's given me a chance to recall things that I probably wouldn't have thought of. And I reserve the right to add to this.
Absolutely.
If between now and the next time I think of something else that was significant.
Absolutely. We would appreciate that.
Yeah,
One thing I remember, the little isolated things you remember, and I'll try to remember this by the next time, that we had a huge ice storm. I forget which year it was, whether it was my freshman, sophomore, or junior year. But one of those years, we had a huge ice storm. And I'd gone home for the weekend and came back up here. And I guess it was the next day, walking across campus was like walking through a set of gunfire. Just one crack after the other, and limbs falling. And the campus was littered. We didn't lose any trees, but those trees lost an awful lot of limbs. But they survived. I don't know. Remember, we probably had some bad weather, but I can't remember it, except for that. Thank you for the water. It came in handy.
Having spent years in the Northeast with ice storms, they're treacherous.
Well, and the campus used to be much more heavily wooded.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, it was.
You know, we've looked at the pictures and said, wow, what happened to all those? I mean, we
Trees, those
still think we have
beautiful
lots of trees.
You do, but
compared to-
there were a lot of trees then.
Forest.
And the campus was
We turn it
just
back.
really compact.
I have to scoot. I have a meeting that I have to. If we're going to turn it back on, I feel so rude, but I'm leading this professorship installation in February, and we're having our first big meeting. There's like 10 people who are going to be there, and I'm sort of the lead on it. So I
yeah,
have,
you need to go get ready for that.
I have to scoot.
Go
But
ahead.
Thank you so much, and I'll be in
You're
touch
welcome.
with you in the next couple of days
Okay.
when you have your calendar, because obviously none of us do here to schedule part 2. But thank you so much, and thank you both of you, and I'll see both of you soon. I feel so
Don't-
rude that
don't
I have
feel
to run,
badly.
but-
Don't feel badly.
and I'm going to give you a quick handshake. But
Okay.
I'm delighted to meet you, and I look forward
Well, it's
to
good to see
seeing
you.
again very soon, probably.
Yeah, we've learned such extraordinary.
Well, I'm in
I
that
know,
building.
I love it.
Mrs. Wagner. Okay, we have a name for the third house.
House.
I
We've
just-
heard about Mrs. Black, and we've heard about Mrs. Blackwell. and We
But
know
Miss
there was
Wagner.
another
It
later.
was Miss Wagner.
Ms. Wagner.
Was the third one.
And we've seen advertisements in fishtails for the boarding houses, but we've never had a real idea of sort of how people ended up at which ones.
It was by chance.
She turned it back on. So
Oh,
we can
okay.
get this.
When I entered school, we knew we had to get a boarding house. I knew it. And so I started making inquiries around, and it just happened that the people I asked said, oh, Miss Luck's got the best place. We go, that's where we go. And so I went over there, and she said she had enough room to take me. I may have had the last spot, I don't know, but anyway, I got in. And ate there as long as she ran the boarding house. And I forget whether it was 1 year or 2 years. I remember eating at Miss Blackwell's, or Miss Wagner's for a while. And then after that, it was Mary Lee. She was the only one left, as I had before, the only one left in 1943.
Yeah, we had an inquiry about Mrs. Blackwell. Someone wanted a picture of Mrs. Blackwell's boarding house. And it was very funny because all of the college pictures were of Thomas Branch. And so we could see the walkway to Mrs. Blackwell's house, but we didn't have any pictures that they were actually in. We did find it, though. Duncan Memorial had a picture of Mrs. Blackwell's house.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Because
Well,
of the site.
her house was there, and then either the next house down or the one beyond that was the home of Dr. Sloan.
Mhm.
I'd forgotten about him for just now, who was the foreign language teacher. And his wife, Gertie, was the alumni director.
Mhm.
And she was an institution. She knew every student who ever crossed that path, as long as she was there. I mean, she could call any of them. And you come back years after you graduated and see her, and she'd remember your name.
Yeah, her
She was a
stories with
great
her.
lady. And was it Rodney McDowell? I mean, Rodney Jones that succeeded her?
Mhm. Yes.
And then, did Susan succeed him?
No, there was somebody in between, but it was short.
There was? Okay. 'Cause
Well,
Susan,
and they played with the alumni department for a while.
Mhm.
It became something else. I think she worked for Bill Gibson, and they called it
Mhm.
something different. And then they reestablished it as
Mm-hmm.
alumni with Susan, I think.
'cause Susan told me that Luther White hired her.
Susan's been here for a long time.
So, and that was an interesting story. We didn't get into that. My time on the Board of
I
Trustees.
said, we
Right.
will. We'll come back and we'll do, I said,
Right.
the after college stories.
All right, that's right. It is after college.
Are there any other college-based stories that come to mind? You know, during your undergraduate years
Mhm.
instead of your later affiliations.
Any other colleges?
No. Any stories while you were here
Oh.
that just spring to mind as
Uh,
something to share today?
well, I'm sure that some will come to mind.
Okay.
Because one thing jogs your memory,
Mm-hmm.
and you think of another one.
Yeah. One thing that we've had students doing a lot of the transcription, and they just love sort of that basic daily life things that you probably think, well, of course, or that are you think are fairly mundane kinds of experiences. They find it fascinating.
Mhm.
Really,
Well,
laundry
they-
and boarding houses, that's
Well,
alien to them.
Saturday classes.
It's absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we had
Funny.
Saturday classes all along.
For most of them, morning classes. We have students
there were
whose
always
feet
morning
don't
classes.
hit the ground until 10 o'clock.
Mhm.
They schedule all their classes in the afternoon because they don't get up.
Right. Oh, and mandatory chapel, they don't understand
Oh.
either. Or.
Oh, we had, right, and of course, back in those days, it was in the not basement, even the first floor of Duncan Memorial, the chapel building.
Mhm.
The church was upstairs.
Right.
Do you know the whole 4 years I was here, I never was upstairs in that church.
Really?
Mm.
Was that really more just reserved for the community?
No, I know. I grew up,
Okay.
and
Nice Methodist boy. Should have been up there.
yes, well, I don't know whether, I guess they had midweek prayer services, but you would never catch a student up there then.
Now, did you drive home? Did you take the train?
No, well, there weren't any. I didn't have a
Bus?
car. There weren't but about 3 or 4 cars on campus.
Okay. That's alien.
There were 2 or 3 students that had cars, and one thing we used to do, and you'll remind me of this when I come back up here next time, while we were in school, there was a boy named I think it was Wallace Dodd. I'm not sure. Dodd. He was from up around Waynesboro someplace. And I don't know where it came from, but he had some money, and he had a car, sedan, and he somehow or other made connections with the people who ran the mosque in Richmond, and they would have shows, plays, orchestras would come in and play. And they wanted ushers. And they were perfectly glad to have college students. And so he would get these opportunities. And we had to wear tuxedos to usher. But that would distinguish, it wasn't a uniform, but it set you off from the rest of the people so that they could tell who the ushers were. And then when the pro, or whatever it was, started, we were free to go sit, where we wanted to. And Kay Kaiser, Glenn Miller, Kay Kaiser, Tommy Dorsey, all those big orchestras. Kay Kaiser was from North Carolina, UNC, and he had his College of Musical Knowledge. And he had a good orchestra. And he came here to mosque, and I got into usher. And then as soon as I started, we went down and sat on the front row. But this guy was one of the guys that had a car. I don't know. Did I tell you what they called Bunny? I called him Bunny Crumb. Those things turned off now, isn't it?
I could turn it off now.
The other way. He later became a Methodist minister. And I didn't see him for years, but then the first time I saw him, I called him Bunny, and I was told his name was Warner. He didn't like. He never said anything in college. He just took it and went on. But he was always Bunny Crumb.
Well, since he took being called that, I guess that explains the nickname partly.
He had it when he came here.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. And I don't know how the people found it out, but there were not many things that couldn't be found out, I guess.
I think that's still true on this campus.
Yes, it is still a very small campus in that regard.
Yeah.
Rumors
But,
fly.
I lived in the dormitory
Back
over
on
there
the record here?
for 2 years.
Shall
And you were talking about the campus life. Pettibon, and in what was then the old gym, the old gym.
Right.
It was very small. I don't know whether you ever saw it or not. It was a very small old brick building of great historic significance. I think it was the first gymnasium on a college in the South, and put there through the generosity of James B. Pace. I'll tell you that story too. And they had taken that building and divided it into 4 classrooms with a center hall. The door into the building was on the side, on the long side. And it was a short hall, and there were 2 classrooms on each side. I mean, 2 and 2. And the classroom on the left, inland down there, was where Terry taught Bible. The next one on that side was where Ehrlich Smith and McConnell, they sort of alternated, both of them used the room. And on one side, they had the German professor, Haley, and I forget what the other one was, but anyway, they had 4 classrooms in there. That was it. In the old gym, or in those other 2 buildings, were all the classes. So it was a closely knit operation. You could get from one to the other fairly quickly. And then, of course, the library. And the library was upstairs. You had to go up steps to get into it. or you went in the door and then you went up the steps. And it wasn't until they built the then new library that they turned Pace Hall, turned that building into a administration building. But it was nice and convenient. I walked across campus many, many times because I was a member of the fraternity over there. We had our house right in the middle of the campus. And then behind us was the gym. There was a field and then the gym. And I was trying to think if there was anything across it. No, there wasn't anything across the street from that, except houses. From well, I can't tell you exactly where they began. There were 4, 5, or 6 houses where Estes is now, and the bookstore, and they were all occupied by professors. I remember that Paul Webb lived in the one on the corner or the next room from the corner, one or the other. And before him, long before him, Paul Webb was a coach up here after I graduated. The coach when I got here, he coached everything: basketball, baseball, and football. And Frank Summers, and he was here 1 or 2 years, and then they got, I think his name was Krenitsky, I'm not sure. He lived in Richmond, but he had gone to the University of Richmond and played all these sports, and was coaching. And when Frank Summers left, they got him to come up here, and he coached for the rest of the time I was here. I was trying to think of anything else, but it was easy to get around on the campus, and you didn't have to worry about automobiles because there weren't any.
So how did you get home on the weekends?
Oh, that's another interesting story. The easiest mode of transport, and right there at where that traffic light is now, was the intersection, You walk down there, put your cap on, and do that, and you get a ride in about 5 minutes. Never failed.
They trusted college students, huh?
Oh, yes, yes. And hitchhiking then, for college students, was a common thing, but there weren't any cars. And so my then wife was in school up at Mary Washington, and I hitchhiked up there many times. I'd come home late Sunday afternoon and decide I wanted to go to Mary Washington. So I'd put on my coat, go down and get my cap, go down the highway, and stick my thumb up, get a ride right up number 1 highway. One time I got in a car at the end of the daytime, in the afternoon, headed up that way. And nice car, and a nice young man in it. Got in and got seated and looked down. He had a gun strapped to his belt. I thought, oh my Lord, what have I gotten into now? And it turned out that he was a federal officer. I forget Treasury or what, but he was on his way to Washington. And so he picked me up, carried me up to Fredericksburg, dropped me off.
Did you study much in the library? We heard the basement rooms were little cubby holes and popular.
Yeah, they had some study rooms around the perimeter. On the south side is where Dr. Fox had his office, and there was somebody else. He wasn't the only one. there were just a couple of faculty offices down there on that side of the building, and then there was a little cubby hole to go around the sides. Like most libraries have, you know, sometimes you stay there next to in the stacks and work. I spent a lot of time over there when I was doing that research paper for Dr. Webb. You know, his class was very interesting. It was English literature, and very, very frequently he would read to us, read the poem or the story to us. I'm looking back on it now, I can't remember why, but and you know, you remember disjointed things.
I just had one last question. You mentioned the bookstore as one of the buildings.
Yeah, it did come to
Was it a separate
bookstore.
building?
Huh?
Was it a separate building from other things? Was there any?
No, I didn't. I meant the houses were where the bookstore is now.
Oh, okay.
The campus
okay.
center.
So we've seen something labeled as the commissary, and we've seen some older pictures that look like sort of a wall of things for sale and books behind it. What was sort of the bookstore of your time? What was
Well,
that?
now that you've asked me the question, I've got to try to remember. I'm not sure whether we had a store.
Okay.
Probably the school ordered the books and just had them at some central place, and you could go there and buy them.
Okay.
Probably over in Wash Frank.
Because I know before your time, there's something labeled as, we have some pictures from the 30s of like a little, just sort of a little storefront wall almost, and there's books behind it, but in front are things like cigarettes and just general things. So was there any kind of a
don't remember.
store?
I
type of thing?
I won't swear there
It may
wasn't
have
something
closed
like
by
that, but
that
I don't
point.
remember it.
It was in Old Chapel at one point, and then they put classrooms in Old Chapel.
Okay. Yeah, at that point, they may have just not had a standard store.
Mhm.
Probably there was
I
enough
don't
in
think they
town.
did. I don't have any recollection of a standard store. And I started to think maybe the professors sold their own books, but it wasn't any organized store. I know that.
Interesting question. I haven't looked at that.